Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is my New York. We should have a campfire here. We're about to hear enthralling tales of the cops and robbers, barons and builders, feminists and financiers, suffragettes, artists and wobblies who created this city. And there's much more. It's all in this magisterial volume, Greater Gotham, A History of New York City from 1898 to 1919. It's the long-anticipated and very welcome Volume 2 of the Gotham series. And it's written by Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Mike Wallace, of course, and he's here to spin those tales for you next. Mike Wallace, what a delight to see you, and thank you for Volume 2. This is wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Thank you for having me here.
Your center that you started is called Gotham, the Gotham Center. The two books called Gotham, and I was interested to learn that word comes from an Old English, tiny little town apparently in historic England, and what it was known for was that the residents of Goat Town, I think it was, were pretended to be insane, apparently to keep the king out. I wonder if that played any part in you naming your center and your books.
Well, when Washington Irving took the term, which was referring indeed to this little village as a proverbial village of idiots, you know, how many Gothamites does it take to screw in a light bulb? Although this was the Middle Ages. And he applied the term. He was a Brat Pack young journalist writing snotty columns about elite foibles, so he put them down by referring to them as Gothamites. But because there was also this meaning of the Gothamites pretending to be screwy to avoid the king entering and taking a lot of their property, as was his right, then it appealed to New Yorkers' already sense of tricksterism, you know, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, not that there was one then, but the equivalent of it, putting one over on the hayseeds. And the Indians, of course, most notoriously.
Yes.
So Gotham became sort of a nickname in the same way Yankee Doodle was picked up. It was meant as a put down, but it was turned around and made into a popular vehicle.
Do you think many New Yorkers know that history, aware of it?
No, I think only people who read Volume 1 of Gotham really understand this. But Gotham had up and down in popular culture. In the 1880s it was big, in the 1900s it wasn't so big, until Bob Kane was looking around for a setting for his Batman, which definitely was going to be New York City, but he didn't want to use New York City as the name because that would limit market share. What about Minneapolis, you know? Right. So he was walking around and he passed the Gotham bookshop and he passed the Gotham jewelry store and he said, "Eureka, Gotham."
Gotham, yes. New York City as we know it today was essentially created in these 20 years you cover in this new volume. And before we dig into that, the substance of that, I was struck by something that I see as a parallel to today's headlines. For instance, Enrico Caruso, were he alive today, his picture would probably be on the front page of the Post next to Harvey Weinstein.
Irretrievably muddied, but this was almost certainly a con job by a rival entrepreneur who was ticked off that Caruso wasn't singing in his opera house as opposed to the other opera house. So he rigged up this phony story about Caruso pinching bottom of some woman at the zoo, as I remember. And Caruso was devastated, and the word got around, and there were people who had exactly the same response, that this was a pervert and should be shunned by polite society. And at his next performance of an opera, there began to be boos from the orchestra seats, the wealthy people.
Really?
And then they were drowned out by this crescendo of applause from the Italian working people who were filling the galleries. And afterwards, Caruso, in his star room, said, "Oh, New York still loves me." Oh.
That's great. That's good. Historical scholarship, as you have pointed out throughout your career, is replete with selective memory, and something you have worked long to correct, or at least to fill in the gaps. In fact, the 2 volumes of Gotham, and I guess, well, the first volume, was a result of that in a kind of roundabout way, where you were trying to, as a radical historian, you're trying to correct, if I may use that term, the histories of this country, and that didn't go very far, and kind of switched it over segued to New York.
Yeah, this is a historical issue in itself. I mean, the 1950s version of the American narrative was very narrow. It was all about white guys like us, and people in government, in politics, in war, in banking, and so forth. Women, no, women weren't an interesting subject. There was, what's her name, who sewed the American flag? Blacks?
Betsy Ross.
Betsy Ross. Blacks, well, they had George Washington Carver, and they were slaves, but they were sort of happy being slaves. And foreign policy, the U.S. did only good. Then comes the late 50s and the 60s. And people are in the streets demanding inclusion into the American present, the women's movement, the gay movement, the black civil rights movement. And a historians cohort emerges, of which I was a part, determined to incorporate all of these left out people or ignored people in the narrative of the American past. And so I worked with a group of historians who set up a radical history review, who had conferences, who were developing a counter-narrative, and hundreds and eventually thousands of articles, dissertations, etc. And I could see from my position at the center of the matrix of work on this that we had collectively rewritten the history of the United States, but nobody knew it, because there was no overarching narrative that told the story in all of its connected pieces in accessible language. So I, somewhat foolhardily, set out to correct this by writing the history of the US of A in the same style that Gotham is written, as a narrative history, plus footnotes to argue with the opposition. So I had enlisted Ted Burroughs, a colleague of mine at Brooklyn College, and we worked for years, and we produced hundreds and hundreds of pages, and we hadn't gotten out of the 17th century. And it became clear that it would take about 11 lifetimes, and we only had 2 to spare. So after some period of time being significantly depressed, I thought, well, why don't we do something more manageable from this Olympian perspective? Only the history of one city, New York. Oh, well, we'll do New York, but we'll do it in the national and global context that we had worked out in all these years of labor, and that was Gotham. So it's not the only one. By now, this is the de rigueur. You're not even looking at the excluded anymore. You're just looking at women, you're looking at blacks, but you're also looking at categories of analysis that were opened up by their inclusion. It wasn't just that you stuck 50% of the population back in the story, but now you have to deal with relations between males and females. You have to deal with gender issues. You have to deal with sexuality. Nobody talked about sexuality in the 50s. If they did, it was in hushed tones.
Well, you have Margaret Sanger, for instance, in this volume, and you know, I can't say that I've read all the histories of New York City, but unless it was going to focus on, you know, that issue, perhaps sex or parenthood or something, I don't imagine Margaret Sanger was mentioned in too many histories.
Well, until, in fact, this period. In the 60s and 70s, the Radical History was only one of many journals. There was Feminist Studies, which was devoted entirely to exhuming people like Margaret Sanger. The trick was to connect. What I do is not original research, at least if I can help it. but it's making connections. When academics study history, they do it in grooves, in channels: military history, black history, gender history, architectural history, etc., which is perfectly sensible. You develop a set of, inquiring minds, comparing notes, contesting with one another, developing a language that's specific to figuring out the key issues of this channel. But real life doesn't happen like that. Real life happens all at once. And I am personally convinced that novelists are the people who do this sort of thing best. It's built into their characters who are experiencing all these different aspects simultaneously.
Well, I think you've absorbed that. I mean, it may be a bit of a stretch, but I don't think very much to say your books read like novels.
Well, that's the nicest thing somebody can say about the work. My favorite word when people say it is that I really enjoyed that. Because you don't have...
Well, the history, at least the way it was taught to me, and I'm, in reflection, I hate all those history teachers because it was so boring and so one-dimensional.
Yeah.
I mean, so yes, I can understand how people would say, and it's kind of a left-handed, maybe it's two left-handed compliments, but I really enjoyed it. I read history and enjoyed it.
Well, history is a tremendously dramatic phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's the way things happen in real time. The stuff we got in school was a catechism. You had a list of names and dates, which you then regurgitated on exams and then promptly forgot. It was a completely witless experience. Whereas history, in fact, is a means of empowerment. It's a matter of knowing how to understand the relationship between past and present. As Faulkner said, the past isn't dead, the past isn't even past. And it's true, the legacy of history isn't the series of tombstones, but it's a collection of forces which have been at work for some time and are moving through the present and present us with a matrix of constraints and possibilities. And to the degree that we understand this, it doesn't guarantee, but it helps us move in whatever direction we want to, because we understand the way things came to be. And if you don't know that, you're adrift on the surface of things, and you're vulnerable to being conned by any con artist, of whom I will not mention any one in particular, who play on your unknowingness.
Yeah. Well, I just, there's so much I appreciate about Gotham, Volume 1 and Volume 2, but where else are you going to, in a history of this city, you're going to find everybody from Teddy Roosevelt to Irene and Vernon Castle, the dances.
It's capacious.
Yes, it is. 1,050 whatever pages. The book, at least this volume, begins with the consolidation of these two major cities, Brooklyn and New York, into perhaps the imperial city. Why was that inevitable, that these two places were going to combine?
It wasn't inevitable. It was a matter, like so many things, a matter of struggle. The question is who is struggling for it and why. And what's super interesting to me is that the movement for consolidation in the political sphere was joined at the hip with another movement pushed by the same people who were promoting political consolidation, of economic consolidation. This is the era of J.P. Morgan, of John D. Rockefeller, of Andrew Carnegie, etc., that crowd. And that crowd, when they looked at the state of affairs in the macroeconomy, were just perfectly appalled. As far as they were concerned, competition was the problem. Free enterprise was for the birds. These people did not believe in free enterprise. Why? If you have firms competing with one another, they cut prices, cutthroat competition.
Right.
If you reduce prices, your profits go down. If your profits go down, you got to make them up somehow. So you cut labor wages. If you cut labor wages, you get unions. If you get unions, you got to suppress the unions. And the last period, 1890s, was a very bloody one. Machine guns in the streets over labor disputes. And even if you win, now you encourage socialists to say it's capitalism that's fault. This is no way to run a railroad as far as they were concerned. What's the solution? The solution is to get rid of as much competition as possible. And they do it in the economy between 1898, very precisely, and 1904 was the first great merger wave in American history.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands of competing companies, oil wells, coal mines, steel plants, are merged into a mere hundreds of giant corporations like United States Steel.
Standard Oil.
And Standard Oil. And the logic of it is not that they're out to rob people, and the robber barons notion, although they did very nicely out of this, to be sure.
Yeah, they were good at that.
But they believed this was progressive, in a key word of the period, but we don't associate it often with bankers and industrial plutocrats, but they did. They thought this was transcending the rat race of cockroach capitalism, and was allowing you to plan ahead long term, not get lost in short term diversions and the rest. And that notion of consolidation being a good and competition being a not so good carried over into the political sphere. And the same people, the Morgans and the Rockefellers, who were reconstructing American capitalism, were reconstructing New York City. They thought, nuts, New York, Brooklyn, hundreds of small provincial political jurisdictions. Who's minding the store? I mean, the store is really the harbor, which is the raison d'etre of this whole operation. But nobody's paying attention to it. In fact, they're at each other's throats. Bad idea. So, in fact, they engineered a consolidation. And
what's the argument, the convincing argument they would use, as you say, as they take this idea of, competition bad, consolidation good, they take it into the political sphere. How do they convince the politicians?
The politicians in those days
Was it?
cast their
Yeah, I was just.
they had some degree of independent power, particularly at the city level. In fact, it's interesting that despite all of their incredible muscle, Tammany Hall, because it was a democratic system, and they in fact had mobilized the immigrant vote, not only the Irish but many others, had to be dealt with. If you wanted to put a streetcar line down Fifth Avenue or wherever, you had to have this signed off on, and the best way to have it signed off on was to make sure you was transferring sufficient funds to whet the appetite of the politicians. But at the national level and the state level, and ultimately even at the city level, money talked. In 1896, the challenge of the populists, William Jennings Bryan, was beaten back largely in a drive started and motivated in New York City. Rockefeller and Morgan alone came up with $500,000, which was more than the sum total of all the money that the Democrats could raise. That was just two guys. So the notion of campaign finance being only a recent phenomenon, indeed, no question, made considerably worse by the Supreme Court decision. But it dates to this period. Vast amounts of money are poured into electioneering. It doesn't guarantee victory, but it gets you a long way.
So now we have an imperial city, for among other terms. And how does this entity now embrace or confront the world and deal with, as you say, the raison d'etre, the harbor and shipping and manufacturing on which New York was
one of the
largely
things that
built.
they do is, in fact, attend to common concerns. So they expand the linkages to the continent by finally coming up with tunnels that can dig underneath the Hudson River and allow the trains coming in from the continent. There were 7 or 8 lines, and they all stopped dead, impotently pawing the ground at the bank of the river. And the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was the biggest of them all, tunneled underneath, built a station on top, tunneled farther east under the East River to the Long Island Railroad, which is a subsidiary, built more connections where flat barges with railroad cars were ferried across to Bay Ridge, 65th Street rail yards that they set up, which then runs a rail line up through Queens and Brooklyn, and where the Triborough Bridge is now, that linkage paralleled an earlier road, which was a rail line, which is still there, went over Hellgate Bridge. So you could now go from South Carolina to Maine in one continuous swoop and avoid the clutter of the Manhattan operations.
Yeah.
But boats had, you know, the New York piers were always notorious for being pretty run-down affairs, but they were cheap. But now they're a problem. They're 200 feet long. Well, the Titanic and the Lusitania are 800, 900, 1,000 feet long. So they build the Chelsea piers, and they get their oceanic connection enhanced, and they get their continental, and whoosh, they refurbish their old position as intermediary between Europe and North America. But there's also the internal. I mean, when you come up with, on paper, a consolidated megalopolis, it's on paper. The question is, how do you make it real? Well, now you're talking about internal metropolitan infrastructure. The most gorgeous one is the subway system.
Subway system was built during this time.
Yeah.
Automobile replaced the horses.
Yes, that's happened. Now, that's, of course, going to be token down the road, a colossal battle between rail-based and road-based transit in the city. But at this point, it's cooking on all burners.
And that we saw a lot of that a little bit later on with Mr. Moses, Robert Moses, who seemed to favor the auto-based over the rail.
No seam about it. He wasn't General Motors Man of the Year in 1954 for nothing.
No. I'm always fascinated. Well, not fascinated. It just strikes me, you know, the story about the Grand Central Parkway and those parkways that he built, the highways that he built to get people to his great park out there. Why is the name escaping me?
Jones Beach.
Jones Beach. With the overpasses that were too low to allow a bus to go on.
This is a matter of historical debate.
Is it?
Some people have gone out with rulers and all that, and it was a bit of a canard. It got at something essential. He was certainly trying to filter out his audiences. But that seems to.
Well, he wasn't kind. Whether or not that is a canard, he wasn't kind to people of color, and still bulldozed them out of the way for his roads.
Yes.
Historical or selective memory, which we were talking about before, informs the controversy over certain historic monuments. And we're seeing that again in everything from Robert E. Lee to Columbus and Columbus Circle. I wonder, you know, there's the argument take them down. There's the argument leave them there, put plaques next to them to explain things a little better. I was wondering, if we took them down, do we forfeit some history that we need to know?
Yes. We don't forfeit the history itself. It's with us, but it misses an opportunity to elucidate the politics of it all. So, a couple of things about Columbus, let's say, because a fortiori, that's one of the most compelling arguments that's made. If you take it down, there's nobody left to challenge the mythologies that surround Columbus, which makes matters worse. You don't even know that there's an issue. But if you know that there's an issue, then there's a contested story here. That's important to know. It's also important to know who put it up and why. I would argue that it's a very different case than putting up Stonewall Jackson or Nathan Bedford Forrest, who invented the Ku Klux Klan. The people who put that up, and at the moment in which they put it up, was a period of deep, intense racist reconstruction of events. And they knew what they were doing, and it was bad. Even there, and I think there it's a disgrace, and taking down makes sense. The people who put up the Columbus statue were New York's Italians, and they were not talking about what Columbus did to the natives. They didn't even know. Nobody knew, really. It was all mythology land. You know, Isabella hawks her jewels, blah, blah, blah. Most of which is, well, what to do about it then? One is take them down. I don't think that's a good idea. Another is put them all in the graveyard somewhere, like Lenin and Stalin were packed off to obscure outer locations. That also misses an opportunity. I had suggested plaques, or better yet, some video screen saying, well, welcome to Columbus. This is a contested figure. Some people just really, you know, adore Christopher for this and that reason. Other people, etc.
But yeah, I mean, you need a screen or a plaque.
Technologically, it was a problem. People would put graffiti, and I was just in Chicago, and I was walking by the Chicago Tribune building, and there's a statue there. I forget who it was, Norman, let's say, and it said, "Norman wants to speak to you." And this got my attention. And I go up there, and there's a monumental committee for Chicago. And if you hold up one of your little cell phone things that can read whatever they are, the thing with the squiggles and whatnot, then you will, in fact, be plugged into Norman, who was talking about, and instead of Norman, you could be plugged into, well, Christopher Columbus is a disputed figure, you know. Right. And at the end of this, you can say, well, what do you think? Which side are you on? Click here for yes or no. So, some way of engaging people, laying out the issue, putting it in context, is an opportunity that should not be wasted by outright removal.
I mean, the point seems so unarguable. Yeah, to understand Italians have a pride in this man, and they put up a statue, but also to understand this is the same guy who took many of the natives of the islands he visited back to Europe and sold them peddled them off as slaves. I mean, we need to know the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, and what the Italians were doing was a form of entering the official city discourse, like having a parade. You get a parade down Fifth Avenue, you're in. And there was a battle. The Spanish community wanted to put their Columbus statue up in Columbus Circle, and the Italians were much bigger, more powerful. But also they had Verdi Square, and they had Verrazano down in Battery Park. I have a chapter on the history and remembering and these kinds of questions, in which I go into the battle for the patina politics, you might say.
Right, right. How we've been talking to Mike Wallace about Volume 2 of Gotham. How is Volume 3 doing?
Well, Volume 3 I mean, there was 16 years elapsed between the Volume 1 and Volume 2, so the question does arise. Luckily, it's a little better than it looks. Originally, the second volume in the series was going to go to 1945, the end of the Second World War, and not the end of the First World War. But I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and so when we calculated the actual pages and the projected pages, we're clocking in around 3,000 or so. And clearly this exceeded the limits of bindery technology and reader patience and all that. So we cut it to parts.
So what you're saying is a lot of that Volume 3 is already done.
It's not happening next week.
No.
Just as good. People need time to digest Volume 2. But it won't take 16 years.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
So,
Mike, yes, I'm sure you are. Mike Wallace, it's a delight. We've only scratched the surface, but I think there's enough here that will inspire. I hope it will inspire people to go out and get the book and bring a big bag to help carry the thing. You'll have bicep curls you can do with this book. Anyway, it's a delight to see you, Mike Wallace.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.